The next tool we're going to touch on is activity-based forecasting, and it's one of my favorites because it empowers individuals to be able to make better predictions than they ever thought possible. What we're doing is we're taking complex forecasting and breaking it down into more specific information, chunks and bites of projects and processes, so that you can predict how tomorrow will happen in slices and dices. Now, I know that sounds a little bit confusing, so I'll read the exact words that come out of the book. Consider how complex forecasting may appear at times. One of the ways you can gather more specific information is to break down your projects, procedures, initiatives into separate components that predict the future of each component individually, and in combination, create this new experience. Now, the reason this is so valuable is it helps you to give a mental vision of the future much further than you thought was possible, just by using a simple shift in a technology called activity-based forecasting. And there's two parts of it. The first part is to determine the minimum amount of time you must be looking into the future. What will that timeline be like? And then you create a forecast based upon it. When you hear this, you'll say, I completely get it. Some of you might even say, I can do this in my head. When you're done, it'll be, no, I can't do all of that. So let's try this. Or start with number one. How far into the future do you have to look? I can share with you where this came from, and it started with an individual in New York City having some Mexican food on the east side of Manhattan. We're talking, and this individual who's in the technology sector, he is a mid-level manager, says to me, David, we can't predict more than a year or two into the future. And I was more interested in eating than having the discussion, so I just let it go. And a few minutes later, he says, yeah, we're securing this deal. It took about a year and a half for us to secure the deal. I put down my fork, determined that this was the time I was going to have this conversation with him, and I said, okay, let's break this down. I said to him, how long is your sales cycle? And he says, well, for us to get a sale, it can go up for 1 year to 24 months. I said, so after you have a sales cycle, you have a production development cycle. You're creating the software. And he says, yes. I said, how long is that? And he says, between 12 months to 24 months to put it together. What about installation? 6 to 18 months was his number. And then technical support. I said, do you have to support the product when you put it into the field? And he said, of course we do. And that goes about 2 years. I said, I don't know if you know this, but if there's any product liability, are there any concerns that you would have going on longer? Maybe people will keep the product longer. And he says, yeah, maybe another 2 years. Now realize what I just did to this guy. I took him from saying that he can't look 2 years into the future to saying you could look up to 6 to 8 years in the future if you did all the math. 6 to 8 years. You cannot sell the product if you hadn't thought about the whole timeline of being able to support it. So what I suggest to individuals is you have a minimum of 8 years you have to project into the future. In your activity-based forecasting, in this case, 8. I also will often say double it. Take 16. That could be a projection of a forecast of what your industry, trends, cycles, patterns that you should be looking at to be comfortable with what the future may bring. Now, why is this timeline important? It helps us to be able to, as leaders, determine capital needs, employee needs, coverage, insurance coverage, equipment, facilities management. It helps us to understand what types of leaders we may be needing throughout the organization. It also says to an individual that you have to take that 50,000 foot view, which we've talked about before. Have to look higher. You can't just look at the technology. You have to look at all the avenues around it, or all the dimensionality around it. For example, warehousing. Maybe there's a warehousing component. Maybe there's a delivery mechanism. And if you're not paying attention to them, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to lose by noses. Warehouser. They're the I'm going to call them the tree company for all forsaken purposes. They do lumber. They set up fields of acres. I don't know the number off the top of my head. I think it's like 5 million acres. The number may be wrong, but they've given me the number in the past. And what they do is they plant trees, and those trees are harvested. But trees don't grow overnight. So they have to make predictions about the future, whether homes will be made out of the same material, or decks or furniture will be made out of the same material. They have to look to the future to say, if not only building materials, but if there's a sustainability to a forest so that they can rejuvenate it and be able to bring it to life another round through forward. So organizations like Weyerhaeuser are doing this. They're extrapolating, and they have to look at a time frame. Maybe you've not considered that time frame, and doing the math would help maybe in your time frame. How long is your project? How long do you work? How long do you have to look forward? Now the second part actually makes this a little bit more fun. You can take that exact same series and create a forecast, and there are 4 separate steps that goes along with creating this. What you're doing is you're looking to project using cycles, trends, patterns, triggers, all the tools we've already started talking about, and give within that time frame, be able to start saying what will happen, what's the forecast. And if you can now identify with the terms activity-based forecasting, what we're doing is we're breaking up the future into activities. So let's go back just for a second before I move forward. Could you predict how sales will happen in a year from now in this technology, or 2 years or 3 years? Or could you project potentially how it would happen? How about product development, object-oriented programming, automated simulations that come out of algorithms to create the way in which software works? Maybe service delivery platforms will change, and if you did some research, you'd find that there's some new things happening with data farming and data mining. So there are all sorts of components that you can start projecting to. So we broke it up into activities, which is far, 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 far different than sitting down at a table and say, let's talk about the future. Now, just that in and of itself, let's talk about the future. If I said to you, let's talk about the future, you'd probably get lost. But by breaking it down, you could say, oh, I can do some of this. So let's start with number 1. Number 1 is to list all the activities that would be engaged in your particular discipline. Now, you might even break it down even more micro. In the book, I looked at the publishing industry, and I did a scan. These are some of the activities that I had found when I looked at publishing. Outlining, writing, story development, examples, editing, layout, references, printing, and distribution. I'm not an expert in printing, book and publishing printing, but those were some of the categories that I had identified. Now we can predict the future of each one of them separately, collectively. We could sit down and maybe the experts in one place or the people who are outside of that area can say, how do they see outlining moving forward? And they would say, well, maybe in the future there's automated outlining. Maybe outlines would generate themselves based upon content that's online. Maybe it's a contract outlining collaborative ventures where you can create an outline with multiple people. Maybe you have title suggesting software, which has actually come about 20 years ago. I think there was title suggesting software. And voice recognition will be more improved, that books can be written and converted more into readable text. You could do the same thing for writing. And I'm not going to go through all of them because there's an image of this in the book, there's an image of this on paytothink.com, which you can download and look at for free, but I'll give you another one. For example, editing. There could be auto editing, phrase meaning sensors, plagiarism stoppers, auto layout software, rewording for stronger content, and auto add content, where material is being put together in a way that's all functionally done in a smooth and dynamic manner. Every one of these can be. Now, did you see what I just did? I separated it. I didn't talk about where's publishing going. I said, what are all the activities involved in publishing? Once I had my mind around them and started projecting into the future, I could see it. I mean, I got a list here. There's a ton of them. And I can now see how the future of publishing could be different. The third one is to make predictions about each one of those activities, even more so. What you could do it is as maybe a group is tasked with the reporting on how sales cycles will change, how a 5-year outlook on sales cycles, while another person or another group could be looking at the information on product exchange and how product is going to be moving. So you can take the whole industry and have a group of individuals collaboratively with non-competing environments with some of your vendors and start to project out what the future may look like. And with the advancements of robotics, with the advancements of object-oriented programming, with the advancements of adhesive technologies and 3D printing, and oh my God, the world is changing every day. you can start to create your own projection of that future. Will you be right? We talked about this. Well, what you're doing is you're trying to be able to anticipate potential outcomes in the future. So just like the forward orientation and talking about the car driving, we did retro, current, and future. I said that you're not going to accurately predict everything, but what you're able to do is navigate the world as it changes around you and make it more, you don't have to slam on the brakes. And that's what happens when you're not picking your head up and looking. Now, one of the suggestions I have is to bring together a group of people to do this with you. And I'm very cautious about the individuals I work with when it's future oriented. Don't bring people on these teams because they've got a title. Bring them on because they have an insight or a view of the future that's different. The reason is, often people who have titles, not often, sometimes people have titles, are myopic in their view. They've done it a long way, they've done it the same way, and they continue to see the trends moving in that direction. The last one is to summarize your projections, and it doesn't have to be in a long written essay. It could be that you share it with your team and say, let's pay attention to this. And each month you get together and say, is there anything new? Is there anything we're seeing? We add to this horizon marker of changes where we can see what's happening going forward. One of the examples that I used in the book, and I love this example, I was sitting next to a friend of mine, James Newman. Dr. James Newman is Jim. Jim is an astronaut. He was responsible for going up into space many times, and one of them was the 2012 repair of the Hubble, was it 2002 repair of the Hubble telescope. And what they were doing is the Hubble telescope was running out of battery, and they had to do some repairs on it. And one of the things they wanted to do was take out the battery pack, which was 800 pounds, unscrew all the bolts, take them out, move the battery pack out, and move this whole unit back in and shove it in and then screw it down. They had to anticipate everything. I mean, this is all forecasting. How will they get there? What will happen? What will the environment be like? What types of conditions will they face? And one of they came up with is, what happens if, when they're putting the screw back in or taking it out, they end up having a challenge with it? Well, putting a screw in, you've ever put a screw in improperly and it starts to bind? You could strip it. Well, there's no repair shop up in space. So what they did is they had Jim do is practice with these huge gloves, stripping, taking out with a wrench and putting in with a wrench bolts. And they would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So Jim goes up into space, he's removing he takes off the bolts, removes the piece, takes the unit, puts it back in, and now as he's putting it in, wouldn't you know it, he feels a little bit of a micro tug on that wrench, and he knows, better pull it out. So he pulls it out a little bit, readjusts it, and realigns it back in. And it worked. Now, they were also afraid, this is one of the sides that Jim told me, they were afraid it wouldn't turn back on again. And never turn the machine off, and turn it off, and turn it back on again. It's kind of like starting an old car. I think the best part of the story is this. When Jim was about to leave to go up into space, the people at NASA, one of the guys turned to him and said, look, Jim, if you break it, don't come home. You know, here he is going into space, doing this unbelievable act, and a whole team of people were forecasting what his life would be like in those few minutes of changing out and giving us the pictures we see of the universe through the Hubble telescope. Your job is just as important with your team as it was to Jim on that expedition that cost a tremendous amount of money to keep science alive in the space frontiers. So, activity-based forecasting, I'm getting chills thinking about it. I love it. It's such an easy way to help your team and you to be able to see the future in a much different light. So, try it. Look forward to getting you on the next tool in enterprise thinking.